purpose of this video is to go over the Engineers Act topics, specifically the more relevant topics that are applicable to a lot of you guys who are just entering university. And so the Engineers Act is basically, it's a set of regulations laid out by the PEO, which is a regulatory body for the engineering profession in Ontario. So we're going to be discussing confidentiality, professional misconduct, and incompetence in the workplace. So confidentiality is generally, it's self-explanatory. Basically, you shouldn't reveal the specifics of your work to someone outside of your company. And depending on the company, this varies what you can and can't reveal. And this is sort of the formal definition. I'm not going to bother reading it. It's self-explanatory. But let's take a look at why confidentiality is actually important. So a lot of fresh students, specifically first years, they might think that this is sort of a formality or it's not that serious, and they might sort of joke about it or something like that. But it's actually taken quite seriously. So you'll have to sign a proper document, which is referred to as a non-disclosure agreement, which basically outlines what you can and can't discuss with people outside of your company. So usually this includes what project you're working on, how that relates to the company, or when it's going to be launched, or any specific trade secrets. And this is taken really seriously. So you have to sign it, and it usually even lasts even after you leave the company. So for it could last like 1 or 2 years. So even after you leave that company, you might not be allowed to discuss it for a certain amount of time. And so you shouldn't joke about this or even unintentionally say something that's important or something that's part of your NDA. And there's also certain small things that might fall under the NDA that you just might not be aware of. And that leads us to the next point, is that you should make sure with your employer what is and isn't confidential, and that's your responsibility to do so. So I'll give you an example. Is you might work at a software company, and you might deliver that software to X amount of customers, and that particular number of customers might be classified information at certain companies, or there might be certain metrics related to how much data that company collects or how well their software performs. And that might be all classified information. And so a lot of people will mention those specific numbers and even trade secrets on their resume or LinkedIn. So when I say trade secret, it could be like, if you worked at a tech company and you wrote some software, it could be, you mentioned the specifics of how you built that software, and that might also be classified. So you can't reveal trade secrets and metrics. So you should make sure what is and isn't confidential. And it also might relate to events that happen in the company. So for example, if you work at Air Canada, there might be a mishap in the company one day at the airport that causes 2 planes to almost crash. And this information might fall under an NDA as well. So, because if it gets out, it makes customers feel unsafe, investors unhappy. It could make the stock price drop, and it's generally a bad outlook for the company. And so you might not be allowed to reveal that as well. Or maybe you're a finance firm, for example, and so it's common for a third-party regulatory body to come and audit your company, and they might even find some issues with your company. And so whatever the result of that audit is, you might not be allowed to reveal that, and so you shouldn't reveal that in any shape or form. So it's just important to know what is and isn't confidential, and even the smallest things could be confidential. And so you could get in trouble later on if your past employer does find out if you revealed it on, say, your resume or your LinkedIn. So the next topic is professional misconduct. This is also generally self-explanatory, and this is actually closely related with the next topic, which is incompetence, which we'll come back to. And so I'm going to sort of talk about these two in parallel. But let's take a look at this one first. So basically, misconduct refers to sort of your actual behavior and the quality of your work. So, harassment counts as misconduct. Taking a bribe counts as misconduct. Failing to report a situation where that someone might be hurt, a member of the public might be hurt as a result of your work or your coworkers' work. If you fail to report that, that counts as misconduct. And so, this is a summary of what entails as misconduct. So it could even be stealing a document that's not prepared by you. And this is important, and we'll come back to that for a lot of you people who go into civil engineering, where you have to actually put a stamp and a seal on your work, saying that you take responsibility for what happens with this work. So it might be like a drawing of a parking lot or a building that's going to be constructed. And so you shouldn't take a bribe. You shouldn't assist someone who's not a licensed engineer with your expertise. And this is really serious because in some cases you could get into legal trouble. People could lose their lives. You could end up with a criminal record. You could be laid off from your job, and it's just not a good position to be in. And incompetence has a lot of overlap with misconduct, but it's more focused on the actual quality of the work. So formally it's defined as having a lack of knowledge or skill when it comes to the actual work. So producing an engineering drawing that is flawed, whether you do that intentionally or unintentionally, but that falls under incompetence. And so, the consequences for incompetence and professional misconduct are quite serious. So you could have your license revoked. You could be suspended for a certain amount of time. You could be fined a lot of money, so up to $5,000. Your work could be limited, so you might be restricted from further working on, building drawings or parking lot drawings, and that limits your career opportunities in the future. So that could hurt your job prospects. You could have certain conditions laid on you for if you are allowed to work on parking lots. Maybe you have to work under the supervision of someone. You might have to go through certain examinations to prove yourself that you are competent to do the work. Your findings from the if you are accused of misconduct, your findings might actually be put in a public report on a website, for example, that anyone could see. So if a future hiring manager or recruiter is able to find that on the internet, they'll probably not want to hire you. So this stuff can seriously damage your career or even your criminal record in some extreme cases. So it's really important to understand all of these. So in the next section, we'll talk more about why this applies to all of you.
Thank you so much for that, Shaz. Anando and I are now going to cover, especially why first years should care about confidentiality as well as professional misconduct and incompetence in the workplace as well as their own lives as engineers or people who are going to be engineers. So here's 6 points that have kind of been lined up as to why these are really important things. Protecting sensitive data is really important, as I'm sure you care about your personal data a lot. People's lives can be at risk, as we'll see in a few examples that Anando and myself will cover. These issues can not only affect you, but the industry as a whole, as well as the engineering role. And there's a lot of regulations and scrutiny on, transgressing in these areas, so it's important to not do that. There's a lot of negative PR as well, and in general, both yourself and your company, making mistakes in these aspects can be very difficult to recover from if you're going to recover at all. Anyway, on to Anando for our first situation.
All right, yeah, thanks for that, Maanav. So we'll be looking at a couple case studies, one being that of the Google Uber insider information scandal. So what happened was in 2017, a well-respected machine learning engineer named Anthony Lewandowski, who was working at Google's autonomous vehicle research at the time, was approached by Uber to partake in a senior position at the firm. And what ended up happening is that Anthony actually took some trade secrets from Google and gave that to Uber. So Uber and Google, they both have their own autonomous vehicle platforms. And obviously this poses like a conflict of interest because this is potentially information that can be used to benefit the other firm financially and give them an unfair advantage. So he took the risk, and unfortunately what happened to him is that he ended up being caught for taking this risk and was ordered to pay $179 million, which he couldn't afford, so he had to declare bankruptcy, and then the court found him to be guilty for trade secret theft. So the question here is, what would you do?
Would you take the risk of illegally providing some insights to another company? Should Uber have done something different? We want you to pause and discuss this for the next minute with your peers and, come back once you've kind of discussed the different options. Okay. So in terms of discussion topics, we hope that you came up with a lot of interesting things. Here's what Anando and I came up with. So in terms of taking the risk of illegally providing insights to another company, clearly that was really problematic because despite getting an offer at another company, this issue of being discovered resulted the engineer completely bankrupt. So clearly, despite the offer that he would have received at another company, it was not worth the risk, regardless of the monetary gain that he would have gained, to perform this misconduct, as well as this lack of understanding of confidentiality.
How is this relevant to the PEO topics that was discussed earlier in part 1 of this presentation, and why is it important? Use the next minute to reflect on what you learned about confidentiality, professional misconduct, incompetence, and their importance in this situation.
Some of the things that Anando and I thought were very important in this discussion were definitely the lacks of confidentiality, as well as the professional misconduct or the lack thereof in terms of the engineer as well as the company's decisions to transfer trade secrets between companies. Clearly, this was, to the loss of Google as well as to the gain of Uber, but because Uber facilitated this happening, clearly these are things to discover. And it's also one of the reasons that the PEO exists, to arbitrate discussions and to oversee actions like this so that, engineers are required and mandated to keep these in mind when they're conducting professional business. So now we'll be discussing the SolarWinds spyware scandal. So the recent SolarWinds hack on a system called Orion is used by many companies to manage IT resources. And in summary, what happened was a hacker organization detected a fault in the code, and they planted malicious code to create a backdoor for them to use. Now, since this was sent through a system update, it infected over 18,000 customers, which is a really big deal because this allows hackers to have access to a lot of confidential resources. This was later found due to detecting through audits as well as security policies, but this problem went undetected for months. And due to this, many clients' confidential data was risked, and some of the people who were exposed or in this exploit include government agencies as well as Microsoft, Intel, and Deloitte.
Which topic of violation in the PEO Act is the main contributing factor that resulted in this situation, and why? Discuss with your peers.
So clearly in this example, incompetence was the largest violation. At the end of the day, the engineers who created this system did not test it well enough for backdoors, and as such, a hacker organization was able to do that. Despite that, they also weren't able to detect malicious code in an update, which means that there was a lot of incompetence happening in the engineers who were unable to detect this malicious code. So it's clear that we learned that incompetence can develop at any time, and as a result, it's important to be proactive as well as assess the threats that your company may face, especially when it comes to the internet and cybersecurity. You're only as secure as the least secure system or interaction. In these cases, it wasn't an entire company that fell apart, but just one or two employees or a team that fell apart, and as a result, the entire company was liable for the issues of that.
So failing to follow guidelines can definitely risk your job and put others involved at risk as well. Remember, oftentimes you're working with confidential data. So take, for example, the case of the recent Uber crash. If the company did follow guidelines and they didn't rush out to take everything to the track and test it there, they would have potentially saved that one person, and maybe they would have still had their business intact in terms of the autonomous vehicles, right?
And then the most important part has to do with yourselves as first-year students. At the end of the day, you may partake in internship positions related to cybersecurity or otherwise where you have access to real sensitive information. So a lot of these situations can apply to you even before you graduate or become a professional engineer. As a whole, Anando and I really hope that we were able to convince you that the issues of confidentiality as well as professional misconduct and incompetence are important ones to both keep an eye on and follow wherever you go for the rest of your life, because there are serious risks to neglecting these important principles of the PEO.
Now I'll hand it over to Akil and Brian to discuss new grad training options.
Hey everybody, welcome to my Google Engineering, and my name is Brian Kibazohi. I have been here as a product manager for the past 10 years, and I'm excited to help train you guys over professional engineering.
Yeah, hey everybody, my name is Akil Hamilton, and I'm also a software engineer here at Google. I've been here for the past 4 years, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about professional engineering and industry today. Okay, so let's really get into it, and I'm gonna bring up the slideshow. Okay, so McGoogle Engineering Training. So once again, hello new hires, and today is like the first lesson in engineering onboarding here at McGoogle. And the first topic, as we mentioned previously, is professional engineering in the workplace.
So there's a lot we could talk about when it comes to professional engineering, but today we're going to focus on these three things: confidentiality, professional misconduct, and incompetence.
Okay. So the first thing we're going to be talking today about is confidentiality. So the definition. So the definition of confidentiality from the professional engineering website is every person engaged in the administration of this act, including any person making an examination or review under Section 26 or an investigation under Section 33, shall preserve secrecy with respect to all matters that come to his or her knowledge in the course of his or her duties, employment, examination, review, or investigation, and shall not communicate any such matters to any other person. But that was a really long and complicated definition. But what does this really mean? So the summary: do not disclose without permission. Without the express approval and knowledge of your employer or client, you should not be relaying sensitive information to anyone. This covers information learned on all parts of one's engineering job, whether that be through their employment, during an inquiry, or during an investigation. So to give you guys a bit more of a conceptual understanding of this, we will begin with a scenario. Bob, the mechanical engineer, begins working, designing a new Apple store. During the initial project planning phase with the company, he finds out information relating to a new secret Apple product yet to be released called the iStove. Bob needs to design a new display for the stove at the Apple store. Bob's brother, Frank, is a huge Apple fan and asks if he knows any new products Apple has for the store. Should Bob let Frank know about the iStove, even though he was not given permission to disclose information relating to his work to others outside of the organization? The answer is no. This is not allowed. This action would unfortunately break Bob's confidentiality agreement, so he would not be able to tell this to his brother.
So here we're going to talk about professional misconduct, and let's get into it. So professional misconduct can simply be defined as a violation of the rules or boundaries set by a governing body. And in this case, the governing body is the PEO. And it is a self-regulated governing body that sets standards for and regulates these boundaries. But that was a really small and short definition. So we could dive into what professional misconduct actually mean. And it actually comes in many different forms, and here are common examples. So number one is negligence. Number two is failure to act to correct or report a situation that practitioner believes may endanger the safety or welfare of the public. Or signing or sealing a final drawing, specification, plan, report, or any other document that's not actually prepared or checked by the practitioner. And finally, failure to make reasonable provision over safeguarding of life, health, or property of a person who may be affected by the work for which the practitioner is responsible. So a quick summary is that professional misconduct can be summarized as the failure to meet the standards of a practice set by the PEO, and every single engineer should be aware of these standards. And it can be avoided by taking responsibility and having awareness of the professional environment. And all engineers must be aware of how to make the decisions and how that can directly or indirectly affect all parties involved in a project. So let's dive into a scenario right now. So let's say Bob the Builder has recently received his professional engineering license and cannot wait to start sealing and signing civil engineering projects at his consulting firm. But due to Bob's popularity in his small town, he receives multiple contracts a week. And this affects the quality or the effectiveness of his work, since he would also want to meet all these tight deadlines. But Bob then decides to rush his contracts and might end up neglecting some information and would approve some projects without making a reasonable provision over safeguarding health or life or whatsoever. So the question is the practitioner responsible? And is this professional misconduct? You guessed it. Yes, Bob the Builder is responsible, and this is considered professional misconduct. And it has consequences as well. His license can be revoked, suspended, professional practice can be stopped or temporarily paused and limited, and he might as well get a maximum fine of $5,000, and no one wants to lose money. And other bad things could actually end up happening and damaging his own career. So do not risk it. Take responsibility.
Exactly. So for our next topic, we're going to be talking about incompetence. So the definition: the discipline committee may find a member of the association or a holder of a temporary license, a provisional license, or a limited license to be incompetent if, in its opinion, the member or holder has displayed in his or her professional responsibilities a lack of knowledge, skill, or judgment, or disregard for the welfare of the public of a nature or to an extent that demonstrates the member or holder is unfit to carry out the responsibilities of a professional engineer. But again, this was a really complicated definition. So what does this exactly mean? So here's a brief summary. Do not act negligently. As an engineer, you have a responsibility to act responsibly and to the best of your abilities. Do not knowingly act in a way that puts yourself or others at risk, or you can be at risk of breaching this engineering act. So again, let's jump into a quick scenario. Jill Bates is a software engineer at St. Joseph's Hospital. He's building a tool to measure the correct doses of medicine to administer to patients in order to optimize patient care. However, Jill is feeling lazy, and instead of doing the engineering math to accurately ensure the correct amount of medicine is administered, he guesstimates all the calculations so that he can make it home on time to watch his favorite hockey game, the Toronto Leafs. Is Jill breaking the PEO Engineering Act of Incompetence? The answer is resoundingly yes. Jill is acting negligently. So to go into more detail, Jill's actions are putting patient lives at risk when he could be spending the time required to do the calculations. In short, do not be like Jill. So we want to say thank you for paying attention to this brief engineering onboarding session. Okay, have a great day, guys. Bye.